Good morning and welcome to the Proposed Chapter 30 Special Education Regulations Overview webinar. If you're unable to hear me, please let me know, and if you can hear me, please go ahead and send a quick message in the chat box. So good morning, and again, welcome. I'm Christy Weaver-Harris, Policy Manager in the Policy Planning and Charter Support Cluster in the Division of Elementary, Secondary, and Specialized Education at the Office of the State Superintendent of Education. The purpose of this webinar is to provide District of Columbia education stakeholders with additional context to understand the background, purpose, and content of the draft proposed Chapter 30 Special Education Regulations. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box, and I will do my best to respond at the end of the webinar. However, please remember that the best way to provide feedback on the regulations and on this presentation, or any questions or concerns about the draft proposed regulations, is by written public comment. So today we'll get started by going over what exactly is an advance notice of proposed rulemaking and the process that OSSI will follow to move these regulations from proposal to finalization. I'll go over the background and goals of the draft proposed regulations and briefly discuss how the regulations incorporate the 2014 Special Education Acts that were proposed by the DC Council. These are sometimes called the Catania legislation. I will also give an overview of how existing policy is reflected in the draft regulations and highlight some areas of particular interest for stakeholders. Finally, I'll reiterate the next steps in the proposal process. An advance notice of proposed rulemaking is an opportunity for stakeholders to preview draft regulations and provide initial feedback before OSSI moves forward with formal rulemaking. This is a sort of early look at the draft to give everyone in the DC education community a chance at providing early feedback. As an advance notice of proposed rulemaking is not part of the formal rulemaking process, that is, the current proposed draft that you are seeing on the website is not eligible to become final regulations simply by virtue of the current posting. OSSI will not be conducting public hearings during this initial advanced comment period. However, OSSI is using this period to gather initial feedback and will be revising the draft regulations as appropriate before initiating the formal rulemaking process. We intend to conduct formal proposed rulemaking in fall of 2017, and this would include another period of public comment as well as 2 public hearings in accordance with the requirements of IDEA. So this is not your only or your last opportunity to provide feedback on the language. So this advance notice of proposed rulemaking is really an early opportunity for you to do that, and we look forward to receiving and reviewing your comments. The advance notice of proposed rulemaking is open for public comment from Monday, June 26th, through Wednesday, July 26, 2017. To provide written comment, please email us at ossi.publiccomment@dc.gov or mail your written comments to the attention of Elizabeth Morse, Deputy Assistant Superintendent for Policy Planning and Charter Support, at 810 First Street Northeast, 8th floor, Washington, D.C. 20002. If you have any questions about the process, please feel free to reach out to me, Christy Weaver-Harris, at christy.weaver-harris@dc.gov or on the phone at 202-741-0470. To give some background on Chapter 30, the current Chapter 30 Special Education Regulations were largely enacted in 2003, while the federal law governing education of students with disabilities, IDEA, was reauthorized in 2004 with updated federal regulations released in 2006. In the meantime, OSSI has updated Chapter 30 in bits and pieces through formal rulemaking and has encouraged changes in practice primarily through formal policymaking. OSSI has been working toward updating this chapter for a number of years, so we're really excited to finally have a draft available for your review. Administratively, OSSI intends to move the special education regulations from the old Title 5E to the current Title 5A within the DCMR. While doing this, we're really clarifying the existing language and requirements and removing confusing or outdated references and terminology. We've also reordered the chapter in the hopes of it more closely aligning to IDEA and the natural progression of the special education process as experienced by students, parents, families, and schools. Programmatically, the draft proposed Chapter 30 does not represent a massive shift in overall practice. The draft regulations are really an update to reflect current and best practices and incorporate a lot of existing requirements that are found in current policy that stakeholders and LEAs should already be familiar with. However, we do introduce some new requirements, which I'll review in a minute, but know that the intent here is to improve service provision for our students, clarify LEA responsibilities, and address changes in law that we know are coming, especially by virtue of the Catania legislation. OSSI's been working on this draft over the course of the last few years. I've been at OSSI for 5 years, and I've worked on it during my entire tenure here. The draft is inclusive and reflective of years of stakeholder engagement, including the series of focus groups we conducted in 2014, as well as extensive research on best practices and other states' approaches to the majority of the topics addressed in this chapter. Stakeholders have had opportunities to provide softer feedback prior to this posting. However, this advance notice is an opportunity to provide additional feedback. And as I discussed earlier, OSSI will be initiating the formal rulemaking process, which will also provide additional opportunities for community input through public comment and public hearing. This is not your only or your last opportunity to provide feedback. OSSI's planned timeline for the proposed regulations is with the ultimate goal of having finalized rules in effect for school year 2018-2019. So we have the current advance notice of proposed rulemaking that's open for public comment until July 26th, which will be followed by formal notice of proposed rulemaking with public comment and public hearing sometime in the fall. So now I'm going to get into the content of the proposed regulations, and I'll start with the 2014 DC Council legislation that's sometimes referred to as the Catania legislation. This is a series of 3 acts that all addressed improvements to special education services in the district. The draft proposed Chapter 30 regulations incorporate requirements that were imposed by these acts and are currently already contained in the DC Code. So these are existing requirements. Most of these requirements were addressed in a 2015 Special Education Regulations update, which included language around the changes in the initial evaluation timeline, the drop in the age of secondary transition planning from 16 to 14, and new requirements around the transfer of educational rights for students who reach the age of 18 in the district. Those 3 topics are already addressed in the current and effective Chapter 30 regulations and are again included in this draft, although in different sections due to the renumbering of the overall chapter. We also incorporated some new topics in this regulation, and I want to be clear again that these are current legal requirements under the DC Code, but we've included them again in Chapter 30 regulations for ease of reference and to make sure that we're providing comprehensive addressing of everything in special education. These requirements were previously incorporated into OSSI's Part B procedural safeguards to make sure that parents are appropriately advised of their rights as affected by these laws. So in draft proposed Chapter 30, you'll see a few new topics addressed, but these are not new requirements. These include the provision of prior written notice to parents before change in service location, which we added for completeness and clarity of when PWN must be provided. Also, this addresses the provision of documents to parents no fewer than 5 days before a meeting, which we added to heighten awareness at the school level. And we also added language regarding parent observation, again to heighten awareness. And finally, we added language around due process hearings and burdens of proof and persuasion, expert witness fees, hearing officer selection and termination, and attorney abuses, which were also added for completeness. So again, to reiterate, these aren't new legal requirements because they're already imposed by district law and are already present in DC Code, but they are newly addressed in these regulations. As I discussed earlier, the draft proposed regulations don't reflect a huge shift in practice and do incorporate a lot of existing policy that you're already familiar with. Requirements from the following existing policies are included in this draft: the non-discrimination and charter school application process policy, the comprehensive child fine system policy, IEP implementation for transfer students policy, the IEP amendment policy, the related services policy, the policies and procedures for placement review, which is placement outside of the LEA or our change in placement process, And this also incorporates some placement and programmatic requirements that are currently contained in Chapter 28 of the DCMR, and the extended school year policy, including eligibility requirements, service provision for transfer students, and ESY transportation eligibility. All these requirements are adopted. As these requirements are adopted in the final regulations, OSSI will be updating or rescinding policies. And again, that would be through formal policymaking, which under IDEA will also be subject to periods of public comment and public hearing. I'm going to review some sections that OSSI believes will be of particular interest to stakeholders. The proposed regulations reflect significant changes in wording with the goal of providing additional clarity to assist LEAs in executing their responsibility under IDEA and local laws. OSSI encourages stakeholders to provide comment on the entirety of the proposed regulations, but we're going to highlight a few of the following areas to assist in orienting you to what is a rather large draft at almost 80 pages. Section 3012, disability categories, addresses, updates the definitions of each eligibility category, the criteria for eligibility, and IEP team considerations. And you'll see changes in the eligibility criteria from what is currently contained in OSSI's Part B initial eval and re-eval policy. Adapted physical education is addressed in Section 3015, and this provides clarity around expectations for adapted PE. I also want to highlight for you that OSSI's Division of Health and Wellness is doing some work around adapted PE standards, and I encourage you to check out OSSI's website and the LEA Look Forward for more information on those efforts, or you can email ossi.hydt@dc.gov for more information on those efforts. Section 3024 addresses homebound services and hospital instruction, and Section 3025 addresses home instruction. And both of those sections really include general requirements around the LEA provision of services in those settings. Secondary transition is addressed in Section 3027, and this accounts for the anticipated change in the age of secondary transition planning, which will be lowering from 14 to 16. We'll be lowering from 16 to 14. And there's been lots of activities going on across the district in anticipation of this change. Section 3028, IEP Certificate of Completion, provides a framework for awarding a certificate to encourage meaningfulness of the credential. This does not affect a student's access to FAPE. So an IEP certificate will still not be considered a regular high school diploma. So a student who receives an IEP certificate will still be eligible for FAPE. Section 3029 establishes in regulation that the state-level special education system, or SEDS, is the system of record. Section 3030 addresses confidentiality of student education records, and this includes general requirements and references to FERPA. Section 3031 establishes a framework for paraprofessional qualifications and includes minimum qualifications for personnel who provide paraprofessional or aid services. Section 3041 addresses parentally placed private school children where FAPE is not at issue. These are sometimes referred to as PRO students or private and religious organization students. And this incorporates IDEA requirements and existing processes for parentally placed private school students. Section 3043 addresses disciplinary removal, and this incorporates existing IDEA requirements for disciplinary removals and manifestation determination reviews. Sections 3044 through 3046 address restraint and seclusion and the reporting requirements associated with restraint and seclusion. And this adopts the current non-public requirements as applicable to students in LEAs. So these requirements should look familiar if you're at all accustomed with the non-public regulations. And this section really just takes those requirements and imposes them on LEAs in the context of students with disabilities. Section 3099, definitions. This just updates language in accordance with IDEA. There are some other changes in definitions that you should take a good look at that section too. I also want to bring to your attention a memorandum that OSSI published on its website last week. This memo reviews a lot of the same information I went over today, but also includes a section-by-section crosswalk of the draft proposed regulations with the current Chapter 30 regulations and current policy. Now, the crosswalk doesn't necessarily draw direct lines between each specific section and where it can be found in the policy, but it gives you an idea of where the same or similar requirements can be found. The memo is posted on the same OSSI page as where the draft proposed regulations are posted. I'm going to open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. Okay, the only questions that we've received are around whether this recording will be available publicly. And yes, it's being recorded now, and we will post it to the OSCE website as soon as possible. So this will be available for sharing with other stakeholders. We've also gotten a few questions about the availability of the PowerPoint. When the webinar is posted, the PowerPoint will also be posted with it, so you will be able to print that. And we received a question around how families will be involved in public comment. Families are encouraged to participate in all aspects of public comment, including the advance notice that's currently available. And moving forward in terms of the formal rulemaking process, we will also be communicating with our wide network of stakeholders, and they will also be available to participate in public comment and public hearing. So we'll make sure that it's being messaged as widely as possible. I'm going to go ahead and email a link to the memo to all of the registrants for the webinar so that you guys can find it a little bit more easily. It looks like some people are having trouble finding it. We were also asked about if there's going to be an expected grace period between the regulations going final and then expectations on LEAs. And the intent here is to finalize the regulations sometime next spring for an effective date of July 1, 2018. So the LEAs will have some time between now and then to be preparing for the regulations to go into effect. If you have questions about the rationale for changes that you see in the draft, the best way to raise those issues is through public comment. And if you see any errors or have any requested additional language or language changes, also please submit those in public comment. For the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, OSSI won't be directly responding to comments, but for the round of formal rulemaking that will be posted in the fall, we will be doing a comments matrix like we normally do to provide some level of response to comments. The intent here is for you to provide comment on the advance notice and then see your comments reflected in what we post for the formal rulemaking. I've also gotten a question about if changes need to be made to the regulations after the first notice and period of public comment and public hearing. When we post the next version, if that will just be the final version. Under the law, if we make any substantive changes to the draft, we would be required to post it again for another period of public comment. So yes, there would be another opportunity there. I think that's all of your questions for now. So the next step is for stakeholders to submit written public comment. Again, you can do this by email to ossi.publiccomment@dc.gov or by mail, sending your comments to the attention of Elizabeth Morse at 810 First Street Northeast, 8th floor, Washington, D.C. 20002. If you have any questions about the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, please contact me, Christy Weaver-Harris. My email is christy.weaver-harris@dc.gov, and my phone number is 202-741-0470. And if you ever have questions about OSSI's special education regulations, policy, or guidance, please contact my team, the SE Policy team, at ossi.dsepolicy@dc.gov. Thank you for your time today, and we look forward to receiving your public comment.